we therefore take our expectation of what family looks like and then attach it to this group of people that really only just came together a few years ago, months ago, days ago, weeks ago, or whatever, intermittently and at different times, that we expect the same thing out of them as our quote unquote family is like what we experience. That doesn't work. That's not cohesion. That's divisiveness, right? So that's why, it's like, I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. It's one of the few things that drives me absolutely batty. When people use the word teamwork and there's no definition to exactly what that means, because teamwork is going to mean something different to everybody. So if I were to ask you on one word or a hyphenated word or whatever, what is the most important thing to you in teamwork?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'd probably say communication.
Okay, so communication would be your number one thing, right? Mine is competency. So now we don't have the same perspective of what team is.
For many leaders, one of their greatest challenges is in maintaining effective self-awareness. Knowing your weaknesses, what your strengths are as well, are really important to effective leadership and being able to work with people successfully. Within that, it is all too easy to write off a challenging interaction or a conversation that perhaps didn't go the way we wanted it to as the other person just being difficult. That's a difficult person. It wasn't my fault as a leader, as an individual. It was that other one. But that's quite often missing the bigger picture, missing the chance for improvement, the chance to learn from a mistake as well. Not to say that difficult people don't exist. Of course they do. And we're all going to encounter those people sooner or later in the workplace. So there's a dual challenge here, two sides of a coin as ever. I'm joined by my guest today, Brenda, who is a 2-time best-selling author, an award-winning HR professional, a serial entrepreneur as well. And not only does Brenda help business leaders evolve and solve their most difficult people issues, she's also a specialist in crisis management and group dynamics. So all of those challenges I just spoke about, Brenda is very well placed to help you with those, to discuss them with me today as well. She's also a mentor to leaders and managers of all levels, using her own experience in the Fortune 500 to help them work through and deal with those difficult people when they do encounter them, as well as build, develop, and lead high-performing teams. So in this episode, we'll be discussing that extensive HR experience, focusing in on that complexity involved with those difficult personalities, recognizing if it is even that problem you're trying to solve or not, and what to do when it is. We'll also talk about the dynamics of teamwork, the significance of communication, the challenges faced by leaders at various times, most notably during employee transitions. So it's a conversation full of real life experiences, anecdotes, lessons we've each learned from our mentors as well, and of course the really important and highly useful experiences that Brenda's had in her career so far. Without further ado, enough from me. Let's get Brenda on the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Brenda, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's lovely to have you on the show today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I am too. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. And to start us off, over to you, really. Tell us a bit about yourself, your career so far, your background, what you do today and why you do it.
Yeah, so I joke around and I say that I'm a recovering 30-year human resource professional. I'm also affectionately known as the Grim Reaper, like all other HR people are, right? But yeah, so I've been in the game. I've been in the people game for quite a while, and I had always personally struggled with very difficult personalities, but I never struggled with straightforward thinkers and straightforward speakers. And it was funny because I used to think that everybody else sees, like, the people that I would be around would say that those individuals were tough to deal with. But in reality, I think the people that everybody gets frustrated with, and I think we're seeing this shift in the world, we're battling entitlement more now than we ever have before. And I think there's some underlying causes for that. And I don't know, I just found myself in a position where it was just like, I was just crumbling underneath the weight of people that were using some bad behavior to like control, get into my head, not in a manipulative way. I mean, not intentionally, not like they're evil. It's just how things rolled, right? So I started seeing patterns in people's behavior, especially in HR. You see a lot of that, especially when people get caught doing something that they're not supposed to do, or they make a genuine mistake. And, you just see a lot of sides of humanity and personality when you do the kind of stuff that I do. And I've had a weird, like large amount of high crisis kind of things. I've dealt with just about every violent situation you could possibly think of. And it just, so my path has been very, very unique when it comes to HR. And I'm very grateful for it, but it has definitely identified a way forward as I wanted to get away from the tactical and the technical aspects of human resources and really continue to focus in on the people side. And I started thinking, well, what am I good at? Well, I'm good at finding patterns, and that's an innate ability of mine. Like, we all have an innate gift. Mine is I'm one of those weirdos that can stand next to a vehicle and listen to the engine roar and tell you if the timing is off. And where a lot of people need a meter and a gun to do that, I can actually hear it. And so, I use that to my advantage to figure out, like, how can I serve the people that need help? And so that's the short version of where I got here.
Okay. So a few things that I'd like to unpick in there if I can. I mean, firstly, so you mentioned about difficult people, and I think that sort of descriptor, if you like, can mean all things to all people, can't it?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, what is a quote difficult person?
So there's employees specifically who like to argue and debate everything. And then I actually break those down and I chunk them into different buckets. So I think the vast amount of people that we find at kind of the surface level are individuals who just have a very different worldview than us. I heard this amazing analogy from one of my favorite mentors, and what worldview is in most cases are like, we come from different places. I mean, it's very fair to say that our upbringing, you in UK and me in the United States, is very different. And not that, our bodies didn't develop different. Really, what I'm saying is that our perspective of the world was different because you had your experiences with people in positions of authority, and I had mine. And that tells a story in our head. It creates a story. It's like, this is how the world is. And this is how we see it over and over again. Just like here in the United States, it's very fair to say that people who grew up in New York City have a vastly different experience than people who grew up in the middle of the United States in a cornfield. Very, very different. And so that's our worldview. And the easiest way to explain it is that if you look at a lemon and you put on a pair of blue glasses that act as your filter, what color is the lemon? A lot of people say it's green, right? Well, in fact, the lemon is still yellow. So it's just how we look at worldview, which means that we come from a different perspective of how life is. We come from a different set of cultural values and norms, even though as a country here in the United States, we come from a united culture. But then we have subcultures, just like in the UK, you have a couple different countries merged together into one brick floating island in the middle of the Atlantic, right? And even within each culture, you have subcultures. So if you look at Scotland, you've got, folks that are more urban, and then you have the Highlanders. I mean, it's the same kind of a thing, right? So we have these worldviews that shift. And most people, when we get into conflict or arguments or debates or whatever, we're coming from our worldview, and then we're also attaching it to our innermost core values. So some people may value manipulation as a way of getting something, where somebody would value honesty and integrity as a way of moving through the world. Those two don't mix. So guess what? We have conflict, right? How we deal with conflict is also different. Some people are going to be more judgmental than others. Everybody judges, but there are going to be some people who are more disciplined at controlling judgment than there are others, right? So that's the vast majority of conflict. And then you have people who honestly also get into debates and arguments, is that you may have an employee, for instance, that's just, quite frankly, had a bad experience with the company that they work for. That can create conflict. How do you deal with that? A lot of people don't look at it that way. They look at it as like, they just don't get the problem. And I'll be honest with you, companies, we don't always get it right. Leaders, we don't always get it right. And then you may have somebody that tends to argue because they just can't seem to get anybody to hear them. It's like, so for them, it's a consistent breakdown in communication. And then we get into some of the more extreme personalities when you have individuals who are, tendency of narcissism and stuff like, and then the far extreme are the individuals who just honestly just want to see the world burn. And they are out there, and we know that. So when you look at these patterns of behavior, you're going to find similar patterns amongst all of these little buckets, but it's just, you can't approach somebody who has a worldview concern that's engaged in undesired behavior and trying to get that flipped around into desired behavior as you would somebody who's more extreme, or somebody who's a narcissist, or somebody who's had a bad experience with the company, or somebody who's constantly experiencing breakdown. Those solutions are different. And so you have to understand what you're dealing with first in order to apply the right kind of solution. And it may not be exactly the same every time, but the approach is going to be relatively similar.
That's an interesting way of kind of unpacking all of that. And I do think when we hear phrases like difficult people or difficult employees, I feel like in a lot of cases, much in the same way as you've described actually, that's just a kind of a labeling of someone, isn't it? When really what we're talking about is they just look at things differently to us. And there's that mismatch between perspectives. And I think that's a particular challenge for leadership, certainly for HR, when it gets into a conflict space. But it always ties back to the responsibility of leadership is understanding your people. Because if you understand the way they think, you know where they're coming from, you know what their worldview is, et cetera, then you can apply the right solution or the right response to addressing that, rather than just saying, oh, well, they're just being difficult. Because that's the easy thing to do. Any manager can say that. Just go, oh, Steve or Jill, just difficult. Nothing I can do, not my problem. They just have to like it or lump it. And I think that's an excuse, isn't it, almost?
Yeah. And, the thing, too, is that, there are people that will take this, like the stuff that I just rambled through, and they'll take it at a very surface value kind of thing. Like, have you ever been on a team where they did like DISC assessment, or they've done something like, and then all of a sudden, like everybody's getting labeled as a high D, or everybody's getting like I'm an I, and then people are like, no, she's an I. We can't talk to her like that. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's not what it's intended to do, right? We can't just sit there and label everybody. The last thing you want to do is start realizing that you're dealing with a worldview problem, and you come up and tell somebody, it's like, you have a problem with worldview, that. Yeah. Oh my gosh, buckle up.
And actually, I see both sides of the argument when it comes to tests like that. I've never done DISC actually, but the one, I think it was Myers-Briggs, or one of those anyway. The way I've seen it be misapplied, it comes again, it's used to excuse bad behaviour rather than address it. And I think, listeners would have heard me go around to a few experts in various forms of these tests. And I always challenge them, but why this? Because what I've seen happen is, why didn't you deliver that thing you agreed you would deliver? Well, it's because my assessment says that I'm not very good at doing that, so I just didn't do it. Are you like, okay, but that's not helpful.
No, and that is a very low level of thinking, and that's the thing is that, look, not everybody in the world is going to step up. So there is a benefit and a cost to everything, right? The benefit to learning about yourself through either an assessment or through your engagement with other people The benefit is that if you identify something that you don't like about yourself, you can change it like that just by simply making a decision, right? Your employees can do exactly the same thing. If you are sharing feedback with your employees and they're like, ooh, I do not like how I am being right now, they can change it in an instant. However, the cost of that is that it could be difficult. It could be uncomfortable. It could be humbling. It likely will, and all of those things, at least temporarily. And who wants to do that? Ew, right? That's change. Nobody likes change. Nobody likes change because what change does is it interrupts the mastery that we have developed in certain areas of our life. And we don't like that. We get to a point where we're very comfortable doing what we're doing, and that's mastery. So when you get to that level of mastery interruption, people just go, ew, and they don't want to make those changes. And so they push back on it. But here's the thing. It's the law of exposure. Once you've been exposed to something, you can't be unexposed. So a lot of us go running around this world now, still doing what we did, knowing full well that we know that there's another solution. We just don't do it.
Yeah, I think I'm in there with how you use these tests and personality profile or whatever you want to call them. The change management aspect and probably leadership as well. It's not so much about what it is and what it tells you. It's about how you apply it and how you follow through afterwards. And I think that's where all three of those things go off the rails, isn't it? I was trying to think as well, who in the world actually does like change? And the only one I could come up with is maybe like the change manager or the management consultant. They probably quite like it because it's quite lucrative for them, isn't it?
Well, it is. And, and I learned about all this back in my days when I was with Fortune 500 companies, right? I worked for 6 of them. And so we would do these as a team building event. And it was really I don't know if I was the only one that took it. It would probably be very arrogant for me to think that I'm the only one that actually approached it in a certain way. But I'll share with what I did is I looked at it as a way of saying, okay, so I understand that I am a high D and I'm a high I, which means that I'm highly direct and I'm also an extremely high influencer. To me, that's a really great place to be when you're out there wanting to serve the world and help people. The problem with that is that you can be too intense for some people who are not. You can be very intense for people who are really, really cautious, and that's what the C kind of lines up as, or individuals that they're not going to do anything outside of following the rules. If the policy says this and the SOP says that this is what I'm doing and I'm not doing anything else. And then when you have an influencer that comes in, what do influencers do? The influencers influence change. And then now you've got 2 perspectives that are kind of bouncing off each other like 2 magnets, because one is now thinking more on straight line, very direct, very linear. And then you have one that's trying to sit there and say, imagine the possibility if you just, and the other person's like, no, because the possibility isn't here in this paper that I'm figuring out how to do my job with. Right. So, the big question is that when you run into that, it's like, what do those assessments teach you on how you can actually work with other people who are not of the same je ne sais quoi as you are, so to speak? That's the benefit of them.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that's the real power and the strength of these things, isn't it? Is knowing and being able to leverage those differences. And again, we talk about it a lot, things like groupthink and that sort of yes man culture. And it is yes man usually, not yes woman. Funnily enough.
Yeah. And then as a leader, here's the other thing too. That's just from looking at yourself and how you engage with the world. Now, as a leader, a lot of leaders miss is that, they're like, well, this person is this person is this. Well, if I have to go in and pitch something, if my team is having to pitch a solution to an internal problem, and we got to go up in front of the big dog, the CEO, the head shed, right? Who am I going to want to put in? And am I going to want to put in my influencer and work with them to get primed? Because likely they innately have the skills to break through and help address the issue. And especially if they're successful, high I or an influencer. Or am I going to put my silent mouse in there who can barely even wants to tell you exactly what's going on, because all they want to do is just be good at hitting their buttons and fixing things that they know are fit in a box. That's, you can, so there's an opportunity for people to actually utilize that information strategically, internally and externally, but we often miss that. I mean, there are a lot of leaders that do it that way, but if people aren't presented with that as a strategy to using information that comes out, then we miss it.
Yeah, and I think, there's a level of that that's possible if you haven't been through that whole process and you haven't all done tests and all of that, because it almost trial and error sometimes. You'll know like who is going to be most able to get the right result with this particular person. And again, it would depend on the CEO or whoever you're presenting to as well. What is their personality type? What do they respond well to? Like, are they very detail oriented and very focused in the room, or are they playing with their BlackBerry or whatever? Or you know what kind of personality you need to put in front of them. They're going to make them snap away from the phone and focus on what's being said, or is to present data in a way that detail person is going to get really excited and enthusiastic about it.
Yeah. Most leaders are going to respond to what resonates with them. The person, are they differentiating? In other words, the solutions that they're providing. And then at the end of all that, the leader is going to wonder how they're going to substantiate making their decision. In other words, what's the ROI? So, for anybody that needs to influence anyone or get a decision, you got to focus on resonate, differentiate, and substantiate. Because that's what leaders think about all day long. That's what decisions think about all day long.
Yeah, and it's a nice, catchy way of remembering it as well. So.
We get a little snazzy here at 9 o'clock in the morning. And
Fair enough. Yeah. So you mentioned some of your weird stories. I have to ask, what's your best one from your time in HR?
Oh, my weird stories or my exciting ones? Which one do you want?
Either one. Like, which one's the best? What's gonna be most memorable, do you think?
Well, the one that I will never forget ever in my life. I could literally come down with amnesia, and I'm pretty confident I'm not going to forget this one. A while ago, when I was in seat as a human resource pro working for a company, I responded to some employee concerns about some things that another employee was saying, and in the long and the short of it, we felt very confident that it stopped an active shooter situation from forming. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll step you back, right?
Yeah.
It was very memorable. And there were so many signs that were present. Now, whether or not this person would actually engage, because there's levels to this, right? There's a dream level, then there's a planning level, and then there's, staging level. And then the level 4 before they actually become level 5, which is when they're actively, engaged in shooting, is that decision to pull the trigger. So whether or not we knew that he was at level 3, for sure. He was preparing. In the investigation, we found that he was using our company technology to shop for things like binoculars, monoculars, telescopes, and gun scopes. It was really weird. Yeah. And like none of any news outlet that he searched for using our tech, none of it was mass media. It was all underground, weird conspiracy theory type of thing. And he did a couple of other things that really, I was working, because this was for a government contracting project. So I was actually working with special agents within the facilities of the particular base. And as soon as I showed them what I had found, that to me told me that yes, in fact, that we're lining up for a potential situation. Even if he didn't want to pull the trigger, he was intentionally doing things that put that in that description. So why risk it? It's not up to us to figure out whether he's going to do it or not. It's up to us to protect everybody from preventing something from happening, right? So we went ahead and, I talked to the CEO about it, and I said, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to terminate him. I said, I want to get him out of here. I said, that's going to be our best bet. this is actually what I recommend. And I think if we did anything different, we'd be very irresponsible. And so we did. We stopped it.
Wow.
Yeah. We stopped the whole process from potentially even coming through. So yeah, I'm very proud of that moment, but it was intense.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine, especially taking that decision to terminate as well, because there must have been a risk that would set him off.
Yeah, that was the big thing. And and so in talking to everybody, so the CEO is like, what do you like, talk to me, like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, first off, I said, whatever we do, I said, we need to isolate his communication. So I'm going to be his only point of contact. And he goes, agreed. And I said, the other thing is that we got to treat this guy like he's a human being. I said, even though we suspect that he's going to do something, the more compassion that we actually show and control the situation, the less likely he's going to flare up. Because what typically happens, especially with active shooters, is that they always go back to the point at which their life became hell. And they resonate back with that one individual. Now, it could also be associated with a company. Who knows, right? But there's, the thing is that, and this is one of the biggest things that I learned ever, is that when you're engaged in conflict or in like a situation like this, there's always a trigger point. So the question is, what if an employee or anybody for that matter is flaring up, if they're engaging in conflict, if they're getting argumentative, if they're, ramping up for something, there's always a starting point. So what actually happened? And if you can figure that out, you can figure out what to do next, because it's like a car engine, right? If you understand how an engine works and you hear, clang, clang, bang, bang, poof, right? Then you can pretty much figure out that something within the engine has happened and it hasn't happened in the rear axle, right? I mean, it's like the same kind of principle. You can start narrowing things down till you get to a working theory that you are probably going to be pretty close to. And even when you talk to the person, you're still going to learn things. And this particular individual was an individual who's very much about, he came out in his admission and said, well, I just like to be the shock jock of the group. And I'm like, do you understand that people don't take that well? I said, and the stuff that you've talked about is not only disturbing, but is intended to frighten people. And that's something that we're just not going to allow. Period. And then once he realized, like, oh crap, like, I think I really did screw up. Yeah. That stopped. The whole thing just stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good to hear in a way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. Wow. And I mean, it's hard to think of a more extreme example of why compassion is important in that kind of situation as well.
Yeah. And, like when an employee leaves a company, regardless, so it doesn't matter if they leave on their own terms or somebody else's, but especially if they get terminated, they're going to go through the 7 stages of grief, right? Because they just lost their ability to support themselves, although it's likely temporary, right? So they go through this cycle. They get upset and then they get angry. And then the anger comes out and then they'll call you and they'll start telling you like all the crap that happened at work. They'll tell you about all the misgivings, all everybody else's mistakes, and you learn a lot, right? But I've always seen it as, okay, so they've hit the stage. And with him, it took 24 hours and I got the phone and I knew it. I'm like, yeah, I'm waiting for the phone call. They're like, what? So the one where he's pissed off. I said, what do you mean? I said, he's going to tell me everything that's wrong with this company. And like within an hour and a half, I got the call and I called the CEO and I said, well, I was right. Here's what I learned. And he goes, wow. He said, that's amazing. I said, but it's guaranteed. It happens every time, right? So we always wind up learning about that stuff. Sometimes it happens in the moment when we're actually terminating somebody because they've had time to process a little bit. But inevitably it comes out and either it comes to you directly or another employee hears it or something like that, but it will always come out. And in that case, it did with him. And then after that, it was just like, listen, I get that this is a hard time. Here's what you're able to do. And that's another angle too. Tell them what they can do. Because if you tell them what they can do and what they can't, instead of telling what they can't do, you're actually putting in their mindset, you're feeding seeds of abundancy rather than scarcity. So if you're like, this is what you can do, you can go ahead and apply for unemployment. You're basically telling them you're not going to stop them from doing that. You can anyway. You can, here's who you can call for your benefits. Here's what you can do to access your retirement stuff that you've invested in. Here's what you can do. 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 That lessens the blow a lot. Even when they're like rammy and angry or distant and cold and, they're just they're in their feels about what's going on. Even the more you say what you can do, believe it or not, it actually helps them through it a lot more than you think you realize.
No, I definitely believe it. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's the right thing to do as well.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. It is. It absolutely is the right thing. And we're so stuck on doing it our way rather than the right way.
Yeah. I mean, particularly that sort of the moment of transition when people are leaving the organization, I think that's something most companies, especially I think ones without permanent HR representation, they go so badly wrong on it. It's like they won't do an exit interview. The second notice has been handed in or given. It's like, well, you're dead to me now, you're leaving, that horrible sort of cliches. And it's just so unnecessary. It's not the right thing to do. And it just creates this horrible feeling, this bad taste in the mouth, doesn't it, as people are leaving. And the worst bit of it, I think, that managers, leaders overlook when they do that is what everyone else who's not leaving will see and learn from that behavior.
It's like an ugly divorce.
Yeah, where the kids are in the middle going, oh,
exactly.
They don't love each other anymore.
I know, right? and it's like, God, when do we get, we get visitation on weekends? And yeah, I mean, it's that same kind of dynamic.
Yeah, but in a way it's worse because they probably won't see them again, will they? There won't be any visitation. They'll be gone.
Well, for some people, that may not be a bad thing, but for other people, for most, So if it's a well-liked individual, just simply made a mistake, they wound up getting themselves fired, or the company cut back or something, then you are going to have employees that actually mourn that. And here's the thing: I was thinking about this the other day. Is that I was teaching a class online, and I mentioned this. I said, stop saying so. I feel like I need to kind of give a little bit of a backstory. One of the things that I teach when it comes to terminating people is stop apologizing for something that you didn't do, especially if you're terminating for that person for a cause, right? For a reason. If there was their undesired behavior, they did it. Stop saying, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to do this, right? Don't. Why would you apologize for something you didn't do? Now, you can say, I regret that this is happening. That's appropriate. But here's the thing. There's a conflict that exists with us in running a business and taking on this perception that we're building a family at work. Those two don't line up because it's hard to kick a family member out. So it can, so replace family with highly cohesive. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what you want. Anyway, that's why we call it family, because the expectation is that families are cohesive. Not all families are cohesive.
Yeah, I have problems with the family one anyway.
Yeah.
I think I prefer team. I don't mind tribe, but that feels a little bit sort of, I don't know.
Well, a tribe is a conglomerate of like-minded, values and norms and ideas. And unless you're setting your team up like that, if everything you do is based around core values, you don't have a tribe. But you can have a multitude of people that have different views, different perspectives, and it's just like a big old fruit salad of individuals, but you can have cohesion.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, isn't it? Is team. Team's probably my preference because it's a group of people and they can be, they don't have to be by any means the same. Every one of them can be something completely different skill set, different life experience, and so on. But the key part is that, as you say, they're cohesive and they're working towards the same goal. Yeah, they don't always have to agree when they do that. They don't always have to see things the same way or do the work the same way even. But the key thing is they're working towards that same outcome, and they at least agreed in that outcome. The family one, I think it doesn't really work from a leader's perspective in the way that they view their team, because that, for the reasons you said,
I agree.
It also doesn't really work, I think, from an employee's perspective, because then it becomes like if the team is the parent or the leader's the parent of the team, who can really say no to their parents when they ask them to do something, even if it's inappropriate, even if it's outside their contract, outside their agreed hours, and so on. And it's the top of a quite slippery slope, isn't it?
I agree.
Before you know it, you're working like 20-hour days.
Yeah. And, the thing is that, your worldview starts showing up. So you're looking at family as a green lemon, right? So, because what's happening is that we put from our own experiences of what family is. My family is vastly different than your family. Like, our upbringings are just different. And it starts with our families, right? So we know our families to be a certain way, where we see other families from the outside looking in operating differently than our individual families. So we therefore take our expectation of what family looks like and then attach it to this group of people that really only just came together a few years ago, months ago, days ago, weeks ago, or whatever, intermittently and at different times, that we expect the same thing out of them as our quote unquote family is like what we experience. That doesn't work. That's not cohesion. That's divisiveness, right? So that's why, it's like, I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. It's one of the few things that drives me absolutely batty. When people use the word teamwork and there's no definition to exactly what that means, because teamwork is going to mean something different to everybody. So if I were to ask you on one word or a hyphenated word or whatever, what is the most important thing to you in teamwork?
Oh, that's tough. I'd probably say communication.
Okay, so communication would be your number one thing, right? Mine is competency. So now we don't have the same perspective of what team is at all. So you're going to be coming from a successful team works in the construct of having strong communication. I'm going to come from the place of construct of people should be competent. Those two things are not the same. But we're working in teams. We're teamworky, right? Doesn't work.
Interesting they both begin with C, though. Must be a coincidence. There's another one. Anyway. It's no.
Alphabetically aligned.
I think that's maybe why communication popped into my mind, because it is one of the challenges of communication, isn't it? Is that everyone understands certain words to mean different things, and it's true with family as well, and exactly how you've described. So, like, a toxic boss might see that word as, well, family's there to do what I tell them because I'm the patriarch or whatever. Yeah. Whereas someone like me in that situation, if I hear the word family, I would understand it to mean that's what you put first. So you're telling me you want me to put work first before my actual family? Well, that doesn't align with my values, and suddenly we've got a conflict at work, haven't we?
Take what you just used as your example of communication, right? You have a boss a toxic boss that listens, like, you have to do what it is I have to say. Well, conversely, you may have somebody on the team who's probably a lot like me, where they see a problem and they immediately communicate it, but the receiving person may not necessarily see the problem in the same light.
Yeah, or even want to hear about it.
Yeah, or they don't care because it may not impact them in the same way, or they don't think it's as important because they don't, there's something missing in the full understanding, right? So yeah, I mean, it's like that's why teams are dynamic, and instead of, I was thinking about this morning. I did a post on this morning about judgment. We start getting judgy, and judgy can be fun. I have a friend of mine, we talk about this. Judgy comes, like, she gets judgy. I'm like, judgy's getting fun. And she goes, yeah, it is. And I do the same thing too. And then I started thinking about, if you're in the heat of a conflict with something, and what would happen? What is the possibility, or imagine what would happen if suddenly you both looked at each other and you guys decided to completely surrender and get away from any judgment. And all of a sudden, both of us went, let's just fix this. And there's no judgment about what happened, who is involved, how did it get here, who's thinking what, or what do we think somebody's thinking of? Let's just fix it. Like, how freeing would your life be if in a moment, and again, was that moment thing, right? That we can just say, I don't like how I'm being right now. I'm going to drop this. And simultaneously, the same person does the same thing and say, why don't we just fix this?
I think you just described most managers like dream situation. But
right.
Does it ever happen? Yeah. I don't know.
It has happened, but I think that there's a lot of cost to get to the benefit, and that is a cost and benefit. Releasing from judgment is definitely a benefit. There's certainly a lot of cost that gets you there, but if you learn from your cost, time's not wasted.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm an idealist. I prefer to not get in that situation to start, and I think that's why
I don't invite it.
Yeah, but I think that's why what we've just been talking about, like definition of terms and communication and managing expectations, really, isn't it? Is what it's really about. Yeah. Is, if you're going to use a word like team or teamwork, not family, team or teamwork, say what that means to you before you start using it, so that everyone understands what you're intending it to mean, and then everyone's on the same page, and then you don't have these issues with clashes of understanding. Anyway, not always possible or practical, I guess, but.
No, but here's the thing: is that the practical and the most simple is often what works the best. And we tend to overcomplicate things because we're trying to layer tactics, things, thinking, philosophies that don't necessarily work. Just sometimes simple is best. So just go back down to the basics. I mean, yesterday I was on the phone with a client's executive assistant, and I was asking her, like, hey, can you log into the system and see if you can see this? Because I can't. And then we got into this conversation. And we're all frustrated with what is going on. And that's part of the reason why I got contracted in. And there's a system the company is changing the system, but they're not communicating what's going on. And so she said, we actually have a representative. What? Like, how did we not get to this part of the conversation 6 months ago? And I just went, okay. And she goes, what if I were to call them and see if they could help us? And I said, you know what? At this point, go for it. I said, I think anything would work at this point. And instead of sitting there, now I just kind of elaborated that. I went, how did we not, but I didn't do that to her. That may have been what's in my mind, right? But, get over that really quickly, because right now we're actually talking about a solution. How many times have you been involved with a difficult personality, and instead of them, like, somebody says, well, we have this, and then a difficult personality will just start like grinding, gears on top of, like, we're looking at a potential solution in the face. Why aren't we getting after it? Why are we sitting there trying to, like, make somebody wrong or question and challenge and create more guff about something that we're getting in our way? And inevitably what's happening is that we're about ready to miss our own blessing.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember people do get stuck in the problem, don't they? It's like that, they can't see the wood for the trees sort of problem.
Yeah.
And they just forget as well things, and it doesn't come up until too late. But then, I sympathise, because I've done that too many times in my career as well. Like, somebody will come up with this sort of 11th hour, why don't we just do this really simple thing that I've known about since hour one?
Yeah.
And you're just like, why didn't you tell me about that 10 hours ago? And you get stuck in that instead.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it becomes about, why is this person so frustrating? And you go around in circles, and before you know it, you've lost another 2 days.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're describing it perfectly. But it's the person who is willing to embrace the change that is going to instantly say, have their microsecond moment of, why the hell didn't we do this before? And then literally say, you know what, go for it.
I mean, what I would add to that, so like the root cause analysis, the understanding what went wrong and why, that is important, but not at the time, not when you're in the situation. So, like, file it away, have that second or two of frustration, and then focus back on the issue and move on. Yeah. And then once everything's resolved, then you can have a retrospective and look back and say, how can we do this better next time? And it just kind of closes the loop, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And you know what? And, at the end of the day, we're all human. We're not going to be perfect. We're not designed to be perfect. As a matter of fact, one of my other favorite mentors, he says, like, perfection is the lowest standard because it's the one thing that we'll never be able to achieve.
Ooh,
I know, man. He comes up with these knowledge bombs that are just amazing, and that's one of them. And I love that. So,
Yeah, that's good. I like perfection is the enemy of the good as well. That's quite a good one.
Yes.
I can't remember who coined it, but
I don't know, but one of my other favorite mentors, their family core value is never let good be the robber of great. Yeah, that's a good one too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fine line to walk in between those three sayings, though, isn't it?
Sometimes there may be those moments, right? But yeah.
One other thing I'd like to talk about, which is kind of related to this context, is something I know that you've spoken about before, and that's the emotional toll, the impact that leadership can take on the leader, especially when times are hard and when things aren't going well. But I think it's also still true when things are going well and when you're hitting that massive success. There's a different kind of emotion involved, perhaps, but it still takes a toll. So what advice would you have for leaders on how they can manage their own emotions whilst dealing with those challenging times and the difficult team dynamics that we've been talking about as well? So
I don't know if in our exchanges, if you were aware, but a friend of mine and I, we just released a book. He's a retired Navy SEAL. His name is William Branham, and it just dropped 2 weeks ago. And it's called Mission Ready: Building High Performing Teams from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. And William takes the front end of the book and he talks about his principles of leadership that he learned while he was in the SEAL teams. He retired out after 26 years. So he's got a very healthy full career as a senior chief, which is the second highest ranking enlisted personnel in the military, in the Navy. And then I come in with my principles of leadership, but my principles are people leadership, because when you execute what William is talking about, all the people stuff is going to come next. And so what I talk about is how to deal with that. One of the things that I talk about, which aligns completely with your question, is that you got to give yourself some grace. You know, leadership is a perpetual learning machine. It has its own momentum, and you're going to have moments where you're going to have to compartmentalize. And like when I deal crisis management stuff, I have to compartmentalize like a lot. And I'm actually right now I'm helping a company work their way to surviving through cancel culture right now from a prior employee who put some information out in the world, definitely a lot of innuendo, and it caught on wildfire. And so they're in the process of working through this as an issue. And I'm on the back end of it doing some coaching and helping them, you know, from an outward perspective. And that happens every now and again. And I'll tell you what, man, I would never wish cancel culture on anybody. It is to sit there and watch reviews publicly come in from people who don't even know these people, who don't even have an ounce of what it is that they're being accused of being, and having the world actually come in and slaughter you. You have to compartmentalize. Like you have to put up your walls to help protect that. But at the same time, you're only going to be able to compartmentalize for so long, which means that you're going to have to do something to manage your emotional state. If you have the ability, like if you've got an employee, for instance, and we all have that one, and you all know who that is because that name just popped in your head as soon as I'm about ready to say this, that drives you absolutely freaking crazy. You won't let it show. You'll only talk about it behind closed doors. We all have that one person. God forbid, I hope I was never that person to anybody, but we all have that one. If you have the ability to take a breath before you have to deal with that person or whatever that issue that's involving with that person, that's the best thing to do. But not everything allows us to do that. So you have to get good at compartmentalizing. But what happens at the end of that situation is that you got to take yourself out of that compartment and you have to do something for you to refuel. One of the things that I do personally is that I either create a victory or I celebrate my next victory that's coming up. And I actually have a journal that I keep next to me that I write down all the things that I would love to buy when I have a victory. And I give myself permission when I have victories to go out and reward myself with something, because when I see it, then I'm reminded that like that's a victory. Believe it or not, this little tattoo on my wrist is a victory. It's a little victory reward that I have, right? So that's one of the things that I do personally. But you have to find yours. So some people can be working out. Some people will be taking your wife out on a vacation for a holiday or weekend or something like that, or whatever, taking your kids out to a movie, or just do something, have something in place that you can decompress from whatever's going on. Because if you aren't right, your team's going to feed off of that. And what happens is that when we're not right as leaders, our self-confidence starts to drop. And then all these difficult personalities, they can smell that like chum in the water. And and then now you found yourself in a situation that you had no intention of being in, right? And it's just you have to kind of take care of yourself. So, but you have to give yourself some grace too, because we're not perfect. We're not designed that way. This stuff is hard. Leadership is not easy. If everybody would do it, like, we wouldn't call it work. We'd call it something else. So that's my big suggestion.
Yeah, I really like that. I think so many of the kind of the challenges of leadership, I feel like they are self-imposed sometimes, because we get ourselves kind of stuck in our own heads, and we're setting bigger challenges than we need to be facing. We're making things more complicated than they need to be. And if you just like take that step back, give yourself a bit of grace, a bit of time, reward yourself occasionally when things have gone well, it can make such a big difference. And that difference will then flow down to the team and the people you're leading as well.
Yeah.
Because when you're stressed, they are stressed.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Look, business, leadership, commerce, all of that is 80% psychological, 20% operational.
What would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
Ah, man, I have learned so many of them. I think the biggest leadership lesson that I learned was I have to always work on me, because anytime I want to succeed, it's going to require a different version of myself. And like, I'm in a period of success right now, which I'm really, really, really grateful for. And I know that if I want to hit that next rung on that ladder, I have to be better about several things, not everything, but a few things, than I am now. And I just recently leveled up, and I'm seeing the fruit of that. But I know that if I want to get to the next level, I'm not going to be able to do that being who I am at this very moment, at least in part. Doesn't mean I have to completely change my whole makeup. It just means that if I want to get to that next thing, like, I have to overcome certain things. I have to get out of my own way. I have to Roger up and take the courage and step. But here's the thing, is that I know this too, because I teach it and I experience it as well. So I remind myself, because I don't have to necessarily teach myself. I just remind myself of certain things, is that, success is on the other side of the work that I don't want to do. And probably the reason why I don't want to do it is because I have some weird fear about something. So if I address the fear and I take bold, violent action, not violent, but you know what I mean, audacious action. There you go. That's a good one. And more than likely, the anxiety I'm feeling was just the anticipation of future pain that I didn't really fully understand. So I'm now imprinting on a future that likely doesn't exist, that there's something that I don't want to experience. And it's the dumbest thing that I do. And I know a lot of people do it too, but I already know that. But I still have to put myself through this, hey, get over yourself, girl, and just go do it. It's not going to kill you if somebody says no. It's not going to kill you if somebody doesn't, whatever. Or it's not going to kill you if somebody does.
Yeah, I think we all do that.
Yeah, we all do.
There's sayings, aren't there? Like, that it's really easy to think of 100 reasons why not to do something. But, at the end of the day, you only need one reason to do something. And It could make such a massive impact.
Easily.
I've been there as well. I mean, I'm sure everyone has. You get stuck in your head again, don't you? And you just...
Yeah.
But questions like, what's the worst that could happen? I prefer what's the worst that will happen.
Yeah.
Because you could think of literally anything, like the world could explode tomorrow. That could happen. It probably won't, but...
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. So, yeah, and it's funny that, our, fear is irrational, and, we're like a moth to the flame when it comes to being irrational sometimes. But again, we're imperfect beings, and that is the course laid out for us, is how many times are we going to get out of our own way and hit that final wind bell at the end of our life.
For the new leaders in the audience, the ones that are maybe just starting out, or perhaps they've been doing it a few years, but they're really struggling with their team, what are 3 practical steps that you could offer them that they could take today or tomorrow to begin laying that foundation for a really high-performing team?
Yeah. The first thing is that if you are not leading from core values, and if you don't have core values, you have an opportunity to make that change right now. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I was there's a company here in the United States called CarMax, and they sell used cars. Probably one of the greatest leadership learning experiences I have ever had in my entire life was working for them. I went from being a hardcore, really super edgy kind of person to being honed by a really great leader, high performing leader in a high performing team and a high performing company who honed my edges, got me started on this path of thinking. And I actually saw him do it firsthand. One of the things that he would ask people, or when people would say, like, hey, listen, I have this idea for something. And he was teaching us to evaluate our ideas against a value, a core value. And the core value that he trained us on is whatever it is that you're recommending, is it going to help us sell more cars? Now, for some people, it's like, well, that's not a core value. It's like, no, but it's the number one business objective. So once I started learning how to line up and have this, like, this is the end result, are we aligning what we're doing to them? And if somebody said, well, no, it won't, then he's like, then it's not worth us pursuing. Basically what it was is somebody trying to make their job easier. And that's how we get layered in multi-processes, when we over-process our processes, right? But then when a little bit later on, after he got us thinking that way, then he actually pulled us into core values. And one of the core values of the team that he created was integrity. And then his way of expressing it was when we were faced with a customer decision, difficult challenge or whatever, he would always ask the question, because he would slow us down in our thinking. We never made knee-jerk decisions ever. And if it was outside of the policy and we never experienced it, or, we had something and we'd take a look, we'd say, well, what have we done in the past? That was usually the first thing that we would always ask ourselves with him. And he taught us that. Like, well, what have we done in the past? Well, we've done this. Okay, does that align with what we've done in the past? Yes. Then he would ask us this one question: is it the right thing to do? And then we'd sit there and say, it is. But here's another issue that's going to come up. Okay, now let's look at that. This is this issue. Okay, so what have we done in the past? Well, we've never run into this before. Okay, so what is the right thing to do with this? And he would always come back to that. And so when we were dealing with issues, eventually what happened is that we were all so used to that process of critical thinking that the easy stuff now started taking care of itself. The day-to-day, the stuff that we could manage at our level of stamp and authority, the more complex stuff, we'd come to him. In addition to that, what happened was that when we would come to him, it's like, this is what's on my plate. Here's the situation. This is what we've done in the past. I believe this is the right thing to do, but I feel like I'm missing something, or I can't do this without some additional help because I don't have that level of authority to move it forward. Now we just presented him our situation. We presented a solution, and we've now told him that we can't do this alone. Guess what? Boom. He just simply had to execute. He didn't have to fight so dang hard to get us to do what it is we had to do. It was with all of that repetition that we learned how to do that. Well, guess who started doing that with her team? Me. And I just did it, right? And people are like, I had some employees like, man, I really like how you do this. I'm like, do what? And they said, like, figure things out. I'm like, this isn't hard. Like, this is really easy stuff. And then the people that just didn't, I was like, I don't understand why they have to ask us so many damn questions of what. And so what happened is that we learned who was going to be on our team, who was on our bus, and we learned who was not. And so what happened is that those individuals that were on board liked the feeling, they liked the engagement, they liked the responsibility, they liked the fact that they're being treated like an adult. So the people that didn't buy into it eventually just went away. Or we performanced them right out the door because they weren't jumping on, right? So that's what leading from your core values is like. You're measuring every decision up against whatever your core values is. And if there's a breakdown in communication, for instance, and communication is one of your core values, the question is, okay, so where's our breakdown in communication on this? Not who, but where is it? Where does it lie? Because we know it's going to be a who. Nothing communicates out of nowhere. It's all people. So where's our breakdown in communication? Was it a system? Was it somebody not knowing to do something? Like, what is it? So we can, okay, great. And then if we had to make a decision, it's like one of the questions that we would ask is like, how are we going to communicate this? Who needs to know about this? And then we would always ask the question, what haven't we thought of? Right? So those are some things that you can actually do immediately that will literally start leveling the playing field. And the people that are on board with what it is that you expect out of them, they'll be there. And then the people that aren't, then you know that that's the area that you got to work on.
I think my favorite part of that last story in particular is the way it demonstrates the flow down, the trickle down of leadership. I think trickle down economics probably doesn't work. That's a different one.
Yeah.
Leadership, I think, does work. I mean, I've seen it in action. You have, based on that story as well. You've done it, in fact.
Yeah.
And I just think it's that power, isn't it, of leading by example and showing the way first. And then once people see the way, they go, oh yeah, that's not actually not that difficult, is it? I could just do this and this. And then suddenly your whole organization has done that and they've aligned around those values.
Yeah. And it's all repetition. It's the same process over and over and over again to the point where you are boringly predictable. And that's fine.
Actually not boring, but at least predictable.
Predictable, yeah. Like, I know he's going to say this, so I might as well get my stuff in order because, and then anytime you miss it, it's like, damn it, I knew you were going to say that. And then it's, well, why weren't you ready for it? And you just smile, and now it becomes a game. They're like, I know.
Hoping I'll get away with it today, yeah.
Yeah, like, yeah, we'll give you a mulligan for the day, but tomorrow the game starts all over again.
Nice. Okay, difficult question for you now, I think. Maybe not. If you could go back in time, how far back in your life would you go? And what would you say to your younger self?
I would go back to when I was about 4 years old. And if I were my 4-year-old guardian angel who could see and hear me every day, I would literally remind myself a couple of things. Number one, you are amazing. You have gifts and you're using them right now. So don't let anybody cloud your shadow. Don't let anybody put a shadow over you. That would probably be the big thing, And then the other thing too is that if I could give myself regular lessons, I would teach myself how to have handled difficult people earlier instead of getting run over. And so I would definitely up my belief system for sure. I would nurture that. And then really learning how, like, those good solid lessons. I was taught turn the other cheek, which there's nothing wrong with that in certain moments. But then there comes a time where you have to stand up for yourself. And what I was missing was the standing up for yourself. I was always getting the biblical turn the other cheek. There's nothing wrong with that, but you do have to make a stand for who you are and what you believe in. If your beliefs are coming from a place of morality and ethical standards. I don't tolerate bullies. But one thing I know about a bully is that every bully is a coward, unless they're a psychopath.
Yeah. So first of all, what I find really interesting about that is you've gone back much younger than most people when they answer that question. Not everyone gets the question, but when they do, most people will be like sort of mid to late teens, kind of that point where you start to either really come into your own or you struggle with confidence. And so I think that's why it's picked so often. So 4 is really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I remember, and it's funny because I told somebody this story the other day. I was driving down the road and I was just some reason, it was like this little, like if my mind was a movie, this is what it looked like.
Mm-hmm.
I was driving down the road and I'm remembering when I was in kindergarten, which is, I don't know if your school system is the same way, but before first grade, we have kindergarten here in the US and it's in between like a preschool. It's only a half a day. And I was 5 years old. And I was playing with somebody at a table and we were building something or painting something. And I remember thinking this too, is I was bossing somebody around and I remember thinking, you're really bossy. And I realized as an adult, 45-ish something years later, that what I was doing was trying to break free from not being able to contribute to somebody. So I was trying to imprint what I thought that person should have done. And I know exactly where that comes from. I spent a lot of time learning about that in my life. And I remember thinking, it's like, you're being very bossy. Nobody corrected me and I didn't correct myself, but I remember that moment. And so that's why when I go back, going all the way back to 4 years old, I wish that I had better understood that as a kid to prevent it from doing a lot of damage in my own personal life. But, that's the thing is like, they are our challenges to overcome. You either are going to overcome them or you're not. And I chose to do the hard work and overcome it.
Can't argue with that.
No,
it is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the turn the other cheek, I'm with you on that as well. I've always found it, we're getting a bit philosophical now, aren't we? Less into the leadership side of it. But I think it's relevant in terms of our conversation about core values and how you lead a whole organization. But I've always found that turn the other cheek one, it doesn't quite work if you're dealing with cynical other party or aggressive or toxic or other kind of bad actor. And then it always stands kind of in opposition to that other quite famous saying about the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is that good men do nothing, or good people, really. And those two things have never reconciled for me, but they're both objectively good statements.
Yeah.
So it feels like circumstance is the dictator there of which route you pick. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting heavy.
It is a bit, isn't it?
Yeah. It does. It makes you think after a while. Like not everybody goes, not everybody takes a step back to reflect and think on this. And people are like, no, I'm not going down that road. That's just too creepy and too scary. Those are usually the folks that never see progress in their life.
There we go. Yeah. That's a thought as well, isn't it?
I know. We might need like some whiskey for that one.
Yeah. I think we need something lighter, a joke perhaps. Yeah. Anyway, so last question I have for you. Time is flown with this one. We must have been enjoying ourselves. So this one's actually my favourite question.
Okay.
It's called Leadership Heroes.
Leadership Heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, they could be, live or dead, past or present, or anyone from history, someone real, someone fictitious, entirely up to you. But it has to be someone that, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership. Who would that person be for you and why?
That would be my favorite boss, the one that I mentioned earlier, the one who would say, is this going to help us sell more cars? I learned so much working with him in 3.5 years that I came in brokenhearted. And he came up to me one day. He said, I sit and I watch how you deal with people. He says, and anytime somebody deals with you, even when they come in and they're so angry, they walk away feeling really good about themselves. He says, that's not something that you can teach. He says, that's a real gift. And that was the first step that I experienced in this kind of rebirth of, I was never taught how to lead. I was taught how to manage. So it was in that moment where I made that decision that I was going to learn leadership from somebody who really truly understood what it was. And I was really excited about it. It was him. It was absolutely him. One of my favorite things that he did. And I'm like, this is the reason why this man is such a genius. Because you literally sit there and you think, God, man, I wish I would have said that. Like, he'll say something so profound, or he'll do something, you're like, right? We were in a meeting one time, and I wrote about this in one of my other books, in Two Wolves that I wrote. And we had this one girl, she had gotten promoted into a management position, because you never come in as a manager, you have to work your way up. And so there were 3 newly minted managers, and she came in, and we're in a room of like senior people at this point. We've gotten our stripes of working with Tom, and creeps him out every time I mention him, or he knows that I write about him in a book. He's like, it's so weird that you do this, Brenda. Stop. And I still talk to him to this day. Anyway, so she was sitting there, and immediately she came in, and you're talking about like, you really have to work to get a promotion. And I was invited to this meeting because I had to roll out something for the company. And he comes in and he's like, has anybody got anything they want to address immediately? Now, the veterans know, don't do this. And here's the reason why. So she gets in, she starts bitching about the very team people that she left as a salesperson behind. And now she's this newly minted manager. So now she thinks she's going to be able to come in and she's going to bitch and complain and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what do you want to do about it? And you're like, well, I think we should do this or that. We all know better. We know what's coming. So she's going off. She's talking about this person not doing this, and she doesn't understand why salespeople can't do this, and blah, 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 blah. And we're all kind of like looking at each other, and the 3 new ones are just like into it. And so, so she got done. He says, are you done? She goes, yeah. He said, congratulations. You just volunteered to fix it. And she goes, son of a. This is how brilliant he is. And we're all laughing. He's laughing because we know, because he's done it to every single one of us. We knew what was coming. That was part of his training for us, is that when you come to me with a complaint, I'm not fixing your problem. I'm going to make you figure out how to fix it. Because clearly it's something that you're passionate about. So you're the best person because you fully understand what it is that's going on. When you don't come to him with the solution, he will volunteer you to fix the problem. And then he'll say, and if you need my help, I'm happy to listen. But here's what I expect from you, and I want it done by this time. And she's like, and it was brilliant. And I have used that a couple of times.
It's a good story. Part of me wonders whether the downside of that might be that people just won't bring the problem next time because they don't want to get lumped with fixing it. No. Because the folks, we had a very good leadership team. And there were we all have our own quirky personality. We all have something that's some form of deficiency socially that nobody liked. But we were all on the same page, regardless of that. That's what he did. He got us on the same page all the time, every single day. So much so that even when people, did what it is that they did that nobody liked, we still knew what was expected of us and executed each and every single time. This sense of, and part of this thing that he did, but we knew it. Look, those problems that she was crapping about, they're the same problems that we had 9 years ago because they're consistent issues with people who sell. People who sell are not operationally minded. They just aren't. They're good at selling. They're good at influencing, right? They're good at closing deals. That's what we need them to do. But then, the people on the ops side, it's like, well, we don't understand why they can't do this and they can't fix this. And he knew that. So these are just the normal things that are never going to go away. We just embrace them. We fix them when they come up. They're going to drive us crazy because nothing's perfect. But the thing is that she was back to that judging thing, right? She's judging specific people and understand why. Then she's starting to bash people openly in this meeting. And
he's like, congratulations, you just volunteered yourself to fix it. Because if it bothered her that much and she's in a leadership position, she should be addressing it. And she wasn't. She was passing the buck onto something else, and he did not play that game. The issues still are going to get addressed. He's going to hold her accountable to that, because that's always what came next. And that's what we also knew too. But yeah, that was his brilliance.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to be said for empowering people to solve the problem like that as well. Because I think a lot of organisations, it's one thing to say, you know, congrats, it's your problem, and you go and fix it, but it's another to actually follow through on that and give them the tools and the ability and the access and the empowerment to actually go and solve it as well. Yeah,
and the thing is that he would make a note in his calendar that if he said, I want you to bring me your recommendations in 2 weeks, whatever, he would put it in his calendar. And if you didn't show up in 2 weeks, he'd hold you accountable for that. He's like, hey, how come you haven't sat down with me about this problem? And some people are like, are you serious about that? He says, yes, I wouldn't have said it otherwise. So, the power of your leadership is always going to be, the strength of your leadership is always going to be based on your follow-up.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that accountability is key as well. Like, empowerment is good, but it's only one side of the coin, isn't it? You can't have one without the other.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like trust leadership, same thing.
Yeah, not if you want it to work, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Brenda, this has been a great conversation. We've covered so many things. It's been really interesting getting an insight into the world of HR and your experience as well. One small other little question I'll ask you is, if any of the listeners want to know more about you, perhaps get a copy of one or two of those books that you've mentioned.
Yes.
Where can they go to do so?
Absolutely. And thanks for asking that. So first off, if somebody wants to connect with me, matter of fact, you can go, I made it really simple because I do not have a simple last name. So, William, every time I answer the phone, he goes, yo, like that's how he says hi. And it's like Rocky from, yo, Adrian, right? So he always says, yo. So I came up with an easy website that anybody can remember. It's called yobrenda.com. If you want to connect with me, go to yobrenda.com. Tell me when you put your name in, because I'll give you some really good stuff that is practical, useful, you can engage in. A matter of fact, so I want to hear what it was about what you heard during this that, wowed you the most. In addition to that, when you do put your information in, I'm going to send you a free course. It's a free gift from me. It is going to change things instantly for you if you use it, and it's called Impact Scripts. And these are 3 scripts that I have learned and have created over the years. I have tested them, and they absolutely work. So like when you're dealing with difficult people or you're dealing with a lot of drama, these 3 scripts are going to help you get to the root and the core of what is going on very, very quickly. And I'll give you an example of one of them. When you have somebody that comes to you and is saying all sorts of really crazy things that you're kind of like, where are they going with this? You can use this one phrase, help me understand. And you can use it and apply it in a wide variety of ways. And I actually teach you guys how to do that. Help me understand what this is. Help me understand why we got here. Help me understand what is going on. Help me understand why you believe this is to be, right? Help me understand why this problem got out of whack. You're not even like pointing the finger at somebody. You're just asking a really great question. So if you ask really good questions, you get really good answers, right? And then if you spend time listening more and talking less, you're going to be amazed at what you learn. So that's the power of Impact Script. So you're going to get that from me as an absolute freebie. If you would like a copy of the book, you can go to Amazon.com, just type in Mission Ready, and it'll pop up. The book will absolutely pop up because it's a long kind of subtitle, Building High-Performing Teams from the Battlefield to the Boardroom. Unfortunately, if you try and put my name in, you're gonna get a. You just try it. You're gonna laugh when you see it. But that's the reason why I never said, let's search for my name on Amazon, because there's a book that comes up and it's adult parody book. It's not really HR friendly.
Is this a hobby or is it someone else? Yeah.
No, it has nothing to do with me at all. It's like
so,
a children's book. It's a parody of a children's book that's written in alternative humor. We'll just put it that way. So I don't say, just find me on Amazon, because you start putting Brenda and you're like, whoa, That is not what she wrote. So, yes, you need to put in mission ready, and you'll find it.
Good to know. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that one.
No, little marketing tip: if you're an influencer out there, treat your name like a searchable keyword, because if you don't, this is what happens. So some people are gonna like, oh, I wonder if she's doing it, going, and they're like, whoa.
Awesome. Well, I'll put a selection of all the links in the episode description as well, so people can find it easily. And well, that's it. That's all we really got time for. Thank you again so much for being with us today. It's been lovely chatting with you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You do the same, and I really appreciate you having me on. This has been a fantastic conversation.
100%. Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Brenda. I loved that conversation. We covered so many different things, but there's that core aspect, isn't there, about how to recognize whether it is a difficult personality or not, what to do if it is, how leaders can get the best from those situations and evolve and learn from it as we go as well. Thank you again so much for your time today. As I say, really loved that chat. Listener or viewer, if you're with us on YouTube, I've no doubt you enjoyed that conversation as well. I hope you also learned from it. And if you would like to get in touch with Brenda, learn more about what she does, you will find her website and links, etc., in those show notes down below. As always, I encourage you, click on the thing, learn the stuff. So that's almost all we've got time for today. Do join me again next week. I'll be talking the ethics and morality of leadership with my next guest, Michelle Corsten. And until then, stay safe. Keep an open mind and don't write everyone off as difficult. And as always, be a leader, not a boss.